Good evening, everyone, and welcome into One-on-One Nightly. I'm Andrew Galata alongside Lou Orlando and Matt Benson. We'll be with you live from 8:30 to 10 on Twitter and YouTube. And guys, it's great to be with you. We have a jam-packed show in store for everyone watching tonight. We'll talk about the Mets managerial search, some college football news, and top it off with some NFL talk as we're finally in the final quarter of the NFL season, which just is crazy. This NFL season always flies by. But first, start off with you, Lou. How you doing?
Listen, man, I'm doing well. It's always good. It's finals week right now, so it's good to kind of get
Yeah.
away. This is a nice distraction, so I'm really happy to be on talking with you, man.
Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Same with me. It's finals, so a lot of studying, but it's nice to get away from the textbooks and the laptop and get to talk about some sports. So excited to get going.
Yeah, it's always good to unload a little bit, get to talk about some sports, and getting into our first topic with my Mets. It's always good to look at some positive news. Team looking for a new manager, and right now they got all the free agent signings out of the way before the lockout. Now during the lockout, I love this strategy. They can just look at managers. They can really take all the time in the world because there's nothing else going on, and the world is basically just waiting for them and some other teams to make a managerial move. And they've been taking their time, which I like a lot, doing their background checks, doing their due diligence. And this week, they just announced that they're down to their final three candidates, and they're going to have meetings throughout the week with their three candidates here. First one, they met with Matt Cotrero, who is the Rays bench coach, on Tuesday. Then on Thursday, tomorrow afternoon, I should say, they're going to meet with Joe Espada, who is the Astros bench coach. And then finally, the big ticket, I think, for a lot of Mets fans, a lot of insiders are thinking he's going to get the job, is going to be former Orioles manager, former Yankees manager, been around the block forever, Buck Showalter. And it seems like right now it's perceived throughout baseball that he's going to be the guy. And if he is the guy, I love this move for the Mets. It really shows that they're in a win-now position, which as a Mets fan, you love that. And right now, as a Mets fan that's been through the ringer, it feels like in the last 2 years, where you have a lot of scandals going on, a lot of weird stuff. It's just been weird stuff going on with this team. Like the last 2 years feel like 5 years, just how much has went on between this team. It's nice to have just a nice veteran manager who knows how to manage his team, knows how to, motivate guys. And that's why I think Buck, he would be a guy that come here and just stabilize everything, which would be nice.
I absolutely adore Buck Showalter.
Yeah.
Again, I wanted him as the Yankees manager, frankly. I don't have huge problems with Aaron Boone, but I would love if Buck Showalter would come and manage the Yankees. And if you get him as not a fan of the Mets, as a Yankees fan that doesn't necessarily want the Mets to be good, I'd be really upset because Buck Showalter is awesome, dude. I love what Buck Showalter brings, and I think you nailed it on the head when you talked about just like the consistency he's going to bring. He's a veteran presence, and I mean, he's just set teams up for success before. The joke's always kind of been he shows up and then the team wins after he leaves. He did it with the Yankees, left in 95, they win in 96. D-backs leaves in 2000, they win in 01. But I mean, he's just such a consistent manager. I think what he did with Baltimore, which is really an underrated team that didn't have insane talent, took them to the playoffs a couple times. I think he's the perfect guy for win now.
I might be disagreeing with you. I feel like Buck Showalter, he's 65 years old. I don't know if he's gonna fit well with the analytical aspect of the new MLB. I feel like the Tampa Bay Rays, they've been a very, very good analytical team. I mean, obviously they don't have a huge payroll. That's obviously a big thing, and the Mets do have a big payroll, so that'll be a little bit different for the bench coach of the Rays. But I feel like if they sign him, I feel like he could actually bring the new analytics and the new age of baseball to the Mets and could actually bring success to the team.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting, it's a great point I think you bring up, just because all these old managers, whether it be Tony La Russa coming back with the White Sox, or just, it seems like the old managers are starting to come back a little bit, and it seems like, oh, where are they going to go? Are they still going to be, their old ways, just looking at, how the players are feeling on that given day, bullpen decisions, stuff like that, or are they going to go towards the analytics? And I think that's what the Mets have to weigh. I think that's what Buck Showalter has to weigh in these interviews, is how much would he rely on an analytics, just like a whole report for a pitcher or a certain player, rather than, his just gut feeling. And I think there is a judge between that, because, we could talk about the Rays and how great they've been. And look, I think for that team, it's good because, they're not getting these star players, as you talked about. They're not a big market team. But, I think when you look at these big market teams, when a guy like Max Scherzer, you want him pitching. Like, it doesn't, sometimes the analytics doesn't matter as much. You want him out there 3 times through the order or whatever, stuff like that. And you saw kind of come back to bite the Rays, taking out Snell. Obviously, that's the big one, but it's came back to bite them a few times, especially in the playoffs. So I think there's a balance there. And I think a lot of teams have struck it. I think you look at the Dodgers or just, you could look at those big market teams that still use analytics. For me, is Buck going to evolve into that type of manager? I think that's going to be the biggest question if he would be named the manager. I think it's what would he do with the analytics? How would he use the analytics? What type of bench coach would he get? Would he get a young bench coach who could maybe, incorporate those analytics more? I think it'd be really interesting.
You talk about that happy balance. I think he's a guy that could find it. Listening to him on the Yankees, he was an analyst for a couple of years, and he appreciates the analytics. I think he embraces a lot of it, but he also embraces kind of that gut feeling. Like, he is a guy that believes in the theory of hot and cold, which is something that analytics don't necessarily embrace. As a baseball fan, I think that's crazy. I think you have to believe in hot and cold. A lot of former players believe in hot and cold. Paul O'Neill is one of those guys. And I think Showalter has a pretty good shot of finding that happy balance that you were talking about. And I think it is important. Gut feeling, I think, still is a big part of the game. I think there's a human aspect that sometimes the numbers don't necessarily reflect. And so I think Showalter will be a guy that he'll take the analytics, he'll use them to make his decisions. I don't think he's going to completely be like, analytics are out, I hate analytics. But I do think he's going to bring a little bit of that, real world, real feel mentality that I think could culminate in some success.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that real world aspect of baseball is incredibly important, especially as you're in the middle of a game. Obviously, analytics do help you in certain situations, whether it be with the bullpen, pinch hitters, stuff like that. But I think bringing that human aspect to the game could be really important. And I think if he can find that balance, obviously the roster is stacked. They got Scherzer, DeGrom, you name it. Their rotation's amazing. And if he can bring a mix of analytics and the real world, I think the Mets are going to be a great team this year.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think, with Showalter specifically, with how he can manage all of the different personalities with the Mets. Because, you can talk about the pitching staff, and it seems like those guys are a little more stable. Like Scherzer seems like he's going to win at all costs. He's going to try to win at all costs, I should say. And I think the same with DeGrom. And then you look at the other guys in the clubhouse, whether it be a Lindor who's going to be there, or it's going to be a Pete Alonso, or whatever. You can go kind of on and on. You have a lot of different personalities in there. And last season, you saw the ups and downs of it. You saw the rat-raccoon thing between Jeff McNeil and Pete Alonso. You saw the whole thumbs down thing and the thumbs up thing with Javi Baez, who's now with the Tigers, obviously. But it was really a team-wide thing. And I just think with Buck Showalter, all that goes away. And I think with Max Scherzer, all that goes away, which as a Mets fan, you love it, because last year, the worst things that came out of that season, look, there were some highs. The team was in first place for the first 4 months of the season, but the lows of that team just, it was tough to watch it sometimes when, you have players thumbs downing the fans, which is, it's unthinkable. You have Pete Alonso saying, oh, it doesn't matter if we, it shouldn't matter if we just win or lose. We're just trying to watch baseball. It should be fun. Like that type of stuff. Like, I don't think that'll happen now with these new Mets, and I love that. I think what Steve Cohen's done this year, I think now that he's more, not that he's more involved, but he's just more situated as the owner. It took him a year, I think, to get really under his fingertips as just a completely new business endeavor for him. So I think now that he's in that position, I think you see a lot of changes this offseason. And, we'll see if Showalter's the guy. The one thing I will say is if they go with Espada or Cotrero, I don't think that's a bad move either. These guys have kind of moved throughout the system. They're just, going to be new faces in there. And it'd be interesting to see if the Mets go back to a new face. They've done it before with Rojas. They were going to do it with Beltran before that blew up. With Mickey Callaway, it didn't work. So I'm kind of happy that the Mets, if they go with Buck, you're going to someone who's established. And I think the Mets, the last time they went with an established guy was Terry Collins, who was around the league for a long time, just like Buck Showalter. Never won a World Series, never went to a World Series, had some success with the Mets, and that was really the last time the Mets could be like, okay, we had some stable success for a few years. So I'm happy that you kind of go back to that bin of really veteran managers that know how to really manage a clubhouse.
Looking at Espada and Cotrero, I think like coming from good organizations, Espada bench
Exactly.
coach for the Astros, Cotrero bench coach for the Rays, so two organizations that have had success the last few years. I think the biggest thing is the unknown, right? Like Rojas came in, you weren't sure what you were going to get. Even if Beltran had been the manager, you're not really sure what you're going to get. And this is a team that I don't think can deal with that much uncertainty anymore. There's been a lot of uncertainty around the Mets for a while. They've kind of been a bit of a mess. I think you kind of want that stable that stable presence that Showalter brings, and a leadership, honestly, that I didn't really see in Rojas. I think one of the biggest criticisms was that he didn't seem to be a vocal leader. We don't know what he said in the clubhouse, but in the media, he didn't seem to have that commanding leadership presence that I think Showalter will bring to the table.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that Showalter's gonna like really put the hammer down on the team and really cut the nonsense.
Yeah.
I think he's like a tough as nails coach. We've seen it with the Orioles, we've seen it with the Yankees. Like he's not gonna let anything slip. And then going on to Quatraro and Espada, I think looking at younger coaches like that, I think that could be a good thing for the Mets. I mean, we've seen the success of Dave Roberts, who former player, Craig Counsell with the Brewers, another former player. I mean, even Gabe Kapler this year with the Giants. I mean, those younger guys have had success as coaches. So, if the Mets do end up signing either of those guys, I could still see them having a good future with them.
Yeah, I think it's just at this point, I think the Mets, where they're at, I think it's like having another new manager, a young manager, I really should say. It would just be, I think, it'd be interesting to see if one of these guys would be the right guys. Because I think Mickey Callaway, at that point, he was coming from, I want to say the Cleveland, the Guardians, I guess now you want to call them. And then they were just kind of in a World Series, but it was a few years after, so the team wasn't having the same success. Whereas you have a guy like, Espada, who was with the Astros, who, obviously that team has had success for a very, very long time. I believe he was with the Yankees before. Yeah, and he was having success with them as well. So you have more of a track record there. From him, and then obviously the Rays, who have kind of this well-established organization, so a little bit different. Rojas, internal candidate in the organization, really wasn't ready to be the manager. I think that was kind of another thing. He kind of got thrusted into that position. And the one thing I will say about Luis Rojas, I don't want to give him, just like, oh, he was this awful manager. I mean, he got the COVID year, which had its own challenges, and the whole managing a team where you didn't know, like sometimes you would just have a COVID positive and you don't have to manage a team like that. It's probably not the easiest thing to and also to get like introduced over Zoom, like that's a new thing to get to talk with the media, that type of stuff. And this year you come in with a new owner, that's new, so it will definitely have a lot of changes with Rojas. I mean, a lot of changes with the Mets over the last like 5 years. I think over the last 5 years the Mets have had 4 GMs, which is that's not, you're not going to have success like that. So just to bring in a manager, I think the Mets have to be looking more than 1 to 2 years. This has to be a long-term move. And I think Showalter, I know he's 65, but I think he can be there for, a run, a 4-year run to go and win a World Series. And that's something that I think just to stabilize something for the Mets, and just a time where Steve Cohen, he's been this big change. Now you just kind of need a stabilizing figure. I think he would be a perfect fit.
Two of the big things for me, number, because we already talked about, he's a tough manager. He'll lay down the hammer. Players love him.
Yeah,
Adam Jones raves about him.
Max Scherzer said, I want Showalter. And the thing about Max Scherzer I thought was interesting, he was upset that the Dodgers and then the Nationals didn't pitch him enough, because basically he was like, they were like, the analytics is saying you should only pitch 170 innings because your arm and your age. He's like, no, I want to go 200 innings because then in the playoffs I can pitch more. And we saw what happened in the playoffs with the Dodgers, where he back issues I think he had, whereas because he said I didn't throw enough innings in the regular season, I didn't build up over the course of his season. So he wants like a more manager that's going to listen to him, and I guess Showalter would be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, players love Showalter. Even Mark Teixeira didn't play for Showalter, but calls him like the smartest man in baseball. Yeah. So players love him. And then another, I think, aspect of this whole situation is whoever gets named the Mets manager, really big expectations, right?
Oh, yeah.
The Mets, there's not that much time to mess around here and find things out. I think the Mets are kind of expected to contend immediately now, especially after the way last year went down, that huge second half collapse. You want to make sure you have a manager that's going to be able to handle those expectations, and you're confident in, like, he's going to be able to pick up, and right away we're going to be where we need to be. And not that Espada and Cotraro can't do that, but I think it's, again, just there's more questions about their ability to deliver on those expectations.
Yeah, and I think going on to the win now aspect of the Mets, like they can't afford to wait 2 years for Espada or Quatraro to become a good manager. Like Scherzer's what, 37, 38?
Yeah.
He has what, 1 to 2 years left of being really, really good. DeGrom, another year of his prime, like 2 more years of his prime. He can't waste that. Like they need Showalter to win now, and that's what he's going to be brought in to do. So.
Yeah, it's for me. I think when you're looking at this Mets team, and I just think it's going to be such an interesting 2 years, whatever it's going to be. Like DeGrom, like you don't want to waste DeGrom's prime for sure. He's going to get another big extension coming up. He is an opt out this upcoming year, so you're going to think about giving him an extension, and I'm assuming that extension is going to be pretty hefty, just seeing what the Mets gave to Scherzer. And then, like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Max Scherzer will also be pitching for the Mets next year, which is just crazy to think about. And you don't know how long he's going to be, this top alpha guy. And to have those two guys at the top of your staff, you instantly become a World Series contender. And I think that having those expectations is tough, especially in New York, where it's even tougher. You're not in some remote Cincinnati, random Midwest city where there only is 5 beat reporters or whatever it is. Like there's gonna be 20 guys, basically questioning your every bullpen move. That's just how New York is. To have Showalter to come in there and be like, okay, I'm owning this decision. He knows how to handle the media. Had success with the Yankees. A lot of people talk about how that strike season, if it didn't have that strike at the end of the season, that the Yankees would have won the American League, and then they would have played for a World Series just because that team was really good. I mean, Showalter's had the success in New York, so that's obviously another big thing. And I just feel like this Mets team, I mean, I don't know. It feels like something is not like I don't think that they're division favorites right now. I don't think you can. It's gonna be a tough task. Like the Braves are really good. They won the World Series. You have Acuna coming back. You have Mike Soroka coming back, and they're always the thorn in the Mets side. The Phillies, Matt, I know you're a big Phillies fan. I don't think they're a bad team for sure. Marlins, I think they're always a thorn in the NL East side, the Mets side especially. I feel like they always win games in like August and always play the Mets hard. Nationals, they're going to be, I think, the rebuilding team. But this is a tough division, I think. And I don't think it's going to be, a pushover for the Mets come in here and just take it. I think there are a lot of good teams, and it's going to be tough, I think. When you look at this Mets roster, depth could be an issue. I just feel like right now, they're putting the pieces together. I'll be interesting to see what they do forward, and that's kind of what I'm going to be most interested. Is this team going to go out and get another star like Chris Bryant? Are they going to get more depth pieces? How's the bullpen looking? I think that's all going to be interesting as well, in addition to the manager.
Yeah, because looking at this Mets team, like, obviously they have World Series expectations, but I'm hesitant on whether or not they're a legitimate World Series contender yet.
I don't
because
know.
I still think that there are questions about the rotation. You love the top two, but
they won 79 games last year. Let's not make it seem like they're like, they won 90, we're in the playoffs and a step away from the World Series. And Scherzer, I think, is a great player, but I've seen a Mets team with a lot of expectations, and it's fell, because of injuries or whatever it may be. I don't think they're at that point yet. You talk about the rotation, Scherzer, DeGrom, and then after that, you're banking on some bounce back years from a guy like Cookie Carrasco, like a guy like him. You're looking at Tyler McGill, who's going to come in, David Peterson. You kind of grab bag of guys. Taijuan Walker, who had a great first half and then just seemed to get dead armed the whole second half of the season. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think this team's complete.
Yeah, I still feel like the rotation's at least one piece away, whether it doesn't even have to be huge. I think they just need another consistent guy that can get you innings, because even if they stay healthy, which I don't think will happen, because I feel like this rotation just gets hurt every single year.
I feel like every team's rotation gets hurt almost,
And then even I like where the offense is, but I liked where the offense was last year, and then the offense really underperformed, really struggled throughout the year. So I think they've got the pieces in line to be in a pretty good spot. I think their infield's more or less set. They might be looking for another outfielder if that guy's Chris Bryant, but I am hesitant to say that this team is in the best spot to truly contend for the World Series, and I'd be interested. Steve Cohen has not been shy about going out and spending more money, so I'd be interested to see after the lockout if there are some more moves to be made.
Yeah, I'm pretty hesitant, too, about the Mets this year. I mean, the Braves just won the World Series last year, and they have a lot of guys returning. I mean, as long as Freeman returns, which is bound to happen. I mean, like you guys said, I mean, they need a third starter for sure that's a legit pitcher. I mean, after the top two, it really falls off a lot. And, I mean, Taijuan Walker, like you said, he had a good first half of the year and then kind of fell off. I mean, if he ends up pitching well, then they could have that third guy, but I think they need a guy that's had the proven success to really in order to really be a contender for the NL East and obviously the World Series, they need a third pitcher for sure.
Yeah, I mean, two things that I'll say is one, Steve Cohen, he said that they weren't just in on just Scherzer or Gosman, they were in on Gosman and Scherzer. So I could see whether it's a Carlos Rodon, which, I know the Yankees are very interested in, but will Steve Cohen take a little bit more money to snatch him away?
You better not.
I mean, that would be. Look, I wouldn't put it past Uncle Stevie, as I like to call him now. And then Chris Bryant, I mean, I really want Chris Bryant. I want the hammer to be put down on, any team that had, or anybody really that had questions about the Mets. And I don't want to see nothing against J.D. Davis and nothing against, Jeff McNeil and that group of guys. But I really do not want to see J.D. Davis starting on opening day. I mean, he's the worst 285 hitter I think I've ever seen. I mean, you look at his stats, you go to Baseball Reference, and he is a 285 hitter. I'm like, I'm watching every day. I'm like, how is this guy hitting 285? I mean, just one of the most unclutch players over the last few years for the Mets, to be quite honest. I just want that third baseman, also play the outfield, a guy like Bryant. Steve Cohen has the money, and, I feel like for this Mets team, I think if they get Bryant, they're a legit World Series contender. And they're going to compete with the Braves, and the Braves have always been like what the Mets have aspired to be. They're always that team that's fundamentally sound. They make the right plays. They get the right players at the deadline that seem to just come alive and then, win the division. I mean, the team has won, like, they're dominant in the NL East when you just look back at it. I mean, really since the 90s, you had a few spurts from the Phillies, few spurts from the Mets, but all in all, it's been the Braves division for a good 20, 25 years. The Braves are who you have to target, and I really... April and on. I'm not sure when these two teams start to play, but you want to see just a foundation being built where they're going to compete with the Braves, beat the Braves, and I think if you can do that, then you can start looking elsewhere.
Yeah, on the Bryant stuff, I just feel like the Mets have been just circling around Bryant since like last year's offseason. Like we've just heard their name tied with him. I wouldn't be surprised.
Sources said that it's Steve Cohen's white whale because he's looked at him since he was supposed to be his first move as the owner, and they ended up with Lindor, which obviously is not a bad consolation prize. Then they wanted him at the deadline, they couldn't get him, and now we're here again. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, and as to what the Mets might be able to do next year, I think Mets fans might not want to hear this, but I think as long as you can get into the playoffs, prove that you're building towards something, I think that's really what you definitely want to see in this. Yeah. That would be let's start with making the playoffs, and then maybe like looking good in that, because I think you're in a competitive division, and then you take a step back, you look at the NL as a whole, you're still going to have the Dodgers, the Padres. Brewers aren't going anywhere with that rotation, and other teams like I think are going to be this year's Giants are going to pop up every single year, and
Cardinals aren't a bad team either. I mean,
right,
I feel like they're always like right around 90 wins.
So it's a competitive NL, it's a competitive division. So I think just to see steps in the right direction where we're building towards something, there's a clear direction, and it's not just flash in the pan. This is a one-time thing. I think is the biggest thing for consistent success with this team.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love how competitive the NL is. I mean, especially the NL East. I feel like every year between the top 3 to 4 teams, it's always within a few games, and usually the Braves end up pulling it out at the end of the year. But in terms of Chris Bryant, I feel like if the Mets get Chris Bryant, they could really, really make themselves World Series contenders. I mean, he's one of the best third basemen / left fielders in the league, and he's automatically better than McNeil and J.D. Davis. So. Yeah. I think if you guys get him, they could really, really make a push to the World Series this year.
It's Lou, you talked about it earlier, how this team, it feels like they're always set up to go into the season, especially on offense, with success, and then, it feels like going into last season, I was like, the pieces were in place. Dom Smith just coming off a 300 season. McNeil's had back-to-back 300 season. Then it just all fell apart last year, and just it was one of the most bizarre seasons that guys, like Kevin Pillar and, Jonathan VR, the Alars, as the Mets fans would call him. And then you look at just down the line, I mean, the crazy players that kept the Mets in it. And it was like, okay, let's get to when Conforto's back. Let's get to when J.D. Davis is back. Let's get to when McNeil came back. They all come back, and then they just tank. Like, it was the most bizarre story that you had guys, no-name players that, like, I can't even think of now that were on the Mets. I mean, I think Cameron Maben was on the Mets at one point. Like, it was a lot of crazy stuff where, you had guys that, just probably shouldn't have been in the Mets uniform and they were coming through for the Mets. I mean, Coley Lee's another guy. And, it was just a grab bag of AAA players. And this team was like 8 games over 500, 10 games over 500. And then all your big guys came back that you expected to have good years. And they all just all of a sudden hit like 220. And Lindor had a bad year as well. It's just, you got to see them prove it, I think, before, you're going to name them World Series contenders and that type of stuff.
And you would think a lot of those guys are going to end up doing well because I definitely believe in McNeil. I think Lindor is gonna get things figured out. I think there's even like a semi-fun conversation about Robbie Cano if he's he's coming back. The infield, it's a really interesting conversation because you were asking let's not have JD Davis start. I think right now he might not even be able to start if you put Escobar at third, McNeil's at second.
DH would be the interesting. If you
add
a DH, if the NL has DH.
Is that Dom Smith? Is he still playing in the outfield?
Yeah, it'd probably be a platoon type thing, I think. I mean, which is not a bad position to be in, and who knows with injuries where this team ends up. It's not bad to have depth. I'm just at this point it seems like Conforto's gone, so you kind of I think are going into a way which I'm happy about. You're going away from the core that I think really 2018 is when they really started to be together. At Pete Alonso's first year, 2019, they just haven't got it done. I mean, 3 years is enough time to where you could really at least make the playoffs. And as you were talking about, like if the Mets make the playoffs this year, I'd be so happy. Just see them in the playoffs. And if this team got to the playoffs, I mean, nobody's going to want to see Scherzer and DeGrom. I'll tell you that much. Because in a 5-game series, if you have to see those guys 4 to 5 games, I mean, that's gonna be tough to beat.
Yeah, I mean that's what the top 2 does for you. Is it makes you a dominant team in the playoffs. I think the bigger question is the regular season is where that whole 5-man rotation really comes into effect because you need that longevity. You need all the arms that are going to be able to pitch to get you into that spot. Because I think if they get into that spot, even like this past season, if they got into the playoffs, I was like, you got DeGrom on the mound, man. Yeah. Like you got to feel decent about your chances because if you can get an automatic win every time DeGrom's on the mound and then find a way to win some other games, like. You're kind of a scary team in the playoffs. So I think that pitching is going to be good for them if they can get into the playoffs. It's going to make them an interesting team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like every baseball team I've been on, every baseball team I've watched, everybody says it always comes down to pitching. And they have the 1-2 punch. I think they need a third guy in order to really get themselves in a good playoff spot. But once they get to the playoffs, I mean, DeGrom's not going to let up any runs. Scherzer might let up 1 run in 7 innings, whatever that is. So even if the Mets offense has a bad night in a playoff game, all they need to do is score 1 to 2 runs when those 2 are on the mound, and that's automatically like 2 wins right off the bat, and then after that they can figure it out. So.
Yeah, this Mets offense doesn't have to be like great; they just have to be average. I mean, really, when you're looking at it, even throughout the season, I mean, we'll see if they add somebody, or even if they don't. It's not like their rotation's like in a bad spot. I think it's pretty average. Above obviously you have the top 2 guys, but you're not in a bad spot even at the end of the rotation. You'll have David Peterson coming off an injury to give a lefty in there who's had success. So I think this rotation I think is in a good spot. I mean, you have Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom. Yeah. I mean, you're just hoping that those guys stay healthy. And last year, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but when deGrom went out at the All-Star break or like a week before the All-Star break, didn't pitch again in the season. I mean, if you knew then that he wasn't going to pitch because he kind of got set back. If you knew, okay, he's out for the season, the Mets weren't doing anything. Like, DeGrom was the key to that season. I mean, the guy had a 1 ERA. I mean, it's tough. It's so nice when you could just pencil in a win every 5th day. And if he can be healthy and be that guy for the Mets, the team is going to be so dangerous. And you're adding a Max Scherzer, who's a type of that guy too. I mean, it's going to be really tough when you go in for a 3-game set at Citi Field when you have to see DeGrom, Scherzer, and then maybe even a 3rd guy on top of that. I mean, it's almost laughable.
Yeah, we can talk about it really ad nauseum about just like the expectations that you can have for this team.
That rotation has expectations. The hitting, I think, is the biggest question mark.
I think the dangerous thing is just right. We've been in this situation before with the Mets where it's the potential is there, and it really has never. You've never seen it come into work to the point where you're like, this is what I expected to see from them. So I think. I think they need to make a couple more moves, but at the end of the day, you just want to see the guys that you sign. You want to see them perform to the way you thought they're going to perform.
Yeah, I think, getting them to the back of your baseball card is going to be very important. But I think that'll wrap up our Mets talk. Definitely, it's going to be a full, lockout of intrigue for the Mets, however long this lasts. I mean, I God hope there's a baseball season because I really want to see Max Scherzer in that Mets uniform. But next, we'll talk about some college football, very interesting stuff with the playoff coming up, Heisman Trophy winner announced. But first, we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to One on One Nightly. Back here on One Nightly, I'm Andrew Golano alongside Lou Orlando and Matt Benson. And guys, let's get into some college football. It's always that great time of college football where now you're entering bowl season. You had Heisman Trophy winner announced, Bryce Young. And we're going to start off there as Alabama QB Bryce Young won the Heisman Trophy this weekend. Alex Wool, Sam Davis, Ryan Gregoire did a great job covering it there. Got to really, I think, cover that whole event. A lot of, when you're looking at the different, candidates there that were nominees for the award, I mean, so many interesting storylines, whether it be Aiden Hutchinson, who's, could have been the first defensive player to win in like a very, very long time. It was like 20 years, something like that, crazy like that. Obviously C.J. Stroud from Ohio State, and then Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh, which is kind of like, the white wolf out of all those guys. He's like the guy that you probably wouldn't expect to be there. He was, and, obviously Bryce Young, kind of the front runner. I think a lot of people knew he was going to win it. He does win it, and he had a Heisman season. Like, he definitely deserves it. I mean, you saw his Heisman moment. I think that's what they call it, against Auburn. I watched that game. I was like, there's no way Alabama's going to come back, and they did. And I think it was like a 99-yard drive to win that game. And he is a spectacular player. This Alabama team, it seems like it's coming in with something to prove into the playoff. But just talking about Young, I mean, that Alabama offense is crazy, and he leads it.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? There's no one really arguing that he didn't deserve the Heisman. You look at his stats; they're all top 5, top 3 in quarterbacks. And then it's the success of Alabama to, one, pull off that 97-yard drive against Auburn, which is in a spot where, Alabama loses that game. And they're probably not in the playoffs.
Yep.
So, he pulls it off in crunch time, and then following week goes out 421 yards, 3 touchdowns against Georgia, best team in the nation, right? A great defense at that. So I think he really sealed it those last couple of weeks. I wonder if they had lost to Auburn, would he still be the Heisman? I think that would have been a really interesting conversation to see, but he pulls
also,
off
if C.J. Stroud beats Michigan,
right?
Whereas in Ohio State's in the playoff, that's also another thing. I mean, you flip those two games, probably talking about a different conversation.
But the way all the games worked out, I think it's pretty easy to see Bryce Young was the Heisman, and I think it's a fitting end to it. It was a pretty good year for him, and now, Alabama's looking to do something pretty special as the 1 seed right now. So, I mean, what can you say except congratulations?
Yeah. I mean, what a season by him. It was, 44 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, like. That's a Heisman season right there, and to add on 4,500 yards on top of that, like, I think the way he played, especially I believe it was after their big loss to Texas A&M, right? Like after that, Alabama played with a chip on their shoulder, and they were the team to beat after that, and I really like Alabama moving forward into the playoffs.
Man, that team, that offense. I mean, look, as a big Saints fan, looking at those wide receivers. With Jameson, Williams there? I mean, he is a great player, and then obviously, what they're able to do just overall, especially after last year, where they were, one of the best teams of all time. People were talking about that team. They were all really old, they were all seniors, 50-year players, and then now to turn over, and now they're the 1 seed again. I mean, it's crazy, and obviously Bryce Young leads the way. I mean, looking at all the other guys, I mean, look. Kenny Pickett, I mean, I think could be a good NFL quarterback. I think he's a guy that you kind of saw him go onto the scene. I mean, a lot of people, draft prospects, were kind of saying how he could be a good fit with a few West Coast style teams. The way he's able to be accurate, could run. We saw him do the fake slide in the ACC championship game, which is now banned. But I'm happy for him, and I think he could be a good NFL fit for a few teams. Like my Saints, I think that he could be a guy going forward. But we'll save that for the NFL draft time in April. But again, you talk about C.J. Stroud as a guy that who knows. I mean, if Ohio State wins that game against Michigan, I think we're having a very, very different conversation. But I think, as you said, congratulations to Bryce Young, and he still has a lot to work to do in the playoff, and that's what I want to talk about next year. As look, this is going to be a very interesting playoff because these are the 4 best teams. I think you found the 4 best teams, and we'll see kind of how it pans out. I mean, Matt, talking about this first game here, you have Alabama and Cincinnati. Cincinnati coming in, obviously the first non-Power 5 conference team to play in the playoff. They made history already, and they're going to look to continue, with this history and the way they play. I mean, look, they've blown out a lot of teams in their conference. They've blown out teams that, you're just saying the way they win. It's like, okay, this is a playoff team. And you're just looking at their points per game compared to points allowed. They only give up 16 points. They score 39. So, I mean, look, that points differential is just crazy. Definitely happy for Desmond Ritter, and those guys. That defense is really, really good. But as you said, Alabama's coming in angry. They're looking for something to prove, which is just crazy because they won the national championship in just, easy fashion last year. I mean, it was just easy for them. And now this year they're like, okay, we want to win it again and we want to prove something. To me, it's just mind-boggling.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Alabama's a great team. Like you said, they won the championship last year, but every year they're always trying to get better. They're always trying to get better. And I love Cincinnati this year. What a story they had. I mean, they've been a great team this year. There's no doubt that they deserve to be in the top four. I just feel like Alabama's just right now they're really hot and they're really good, and I just don't see how Cincinnati could really do enough to really win against them.
I told you guys off air, like I'm rooting for Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I want them to get into the championship to win something that'd be so awesome. But the back of my mind just tells me it's Alabama, and how do you bet against Alabama? It's the whole been here, done that, and their offense is so good. I will be interested to see how their defense holds up against Cincinnati because I think it really is a battle of two pretty good offenses. And I'd also like to see, again, Cincinnati's defense versus the Alabama offense. I think that's a really huge test for them. Right, Cincinnati held up against Notre Dame, but Alabama is a little bit of a different animal than Notre Dame. So I think it's going to be a fun matchup. I will wholeheartedly be rooting for Cincinnati, but I'm very worried that their season might come to an end.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think if Alabama doesn't win against Georgia and then Cincinnati probably would then play Michigan, I think Cincinnati would beat Michigan, to be honest. I think they're the third best team. I just think that, they get probably one of the worst matchups that, when you play hot Nick Saban, it's so hard to win. It's almost unfair. And, obviously you look at this Alabama offense, it's just crazy. I mean, obviously you have Bryce Young and he's doing what he's doing, then receiving, as I said, Williams, who I'd love to see in the black and gold next year. John Mechie, another guy who he's not going to play in the game, I don't think, but I think he got hurt. But still, look, 2,000-yard receivers there, and then rushing the ball. I mean, right now you have a 1,000-yard rusher in Brian Robinson. So, look, they do it at all facets of the game. The offensive line is, as always, one of the best in college football. I don't see the Cincinnati defense, which is probably going to have to come up big, because if there is a shootout between Alabama and Cincinnati, I'm taking the Heisman Trophy winner.
And
Bryce
also
Young.
2 receivers who have over 1,000 yards, and then on top of that, their running back Robinson is over 1,000 yards. It's going to be hard for that Cincinnati defense to stop Alabama.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's going to be, just one of these games where I think it'll be closer than maybe like a last year where Alabama just runs through everybody, and they ran through Notre Dame, I believe, last year. But, I mean, even this Alabama defense, a lot of people don't talk about him, but he actually has more sacks than Aiden Hutchinson. And that's Will Anderson, the linebacker, outside linebacker. I mean, 15.5 sacks, and, a lot of people think, like, this guy's better than Aiden Hutchinson, who's obviously been getting all the limelight, the Heisman Trophy nominee, and this guy, look, 91 tackles, 15.5 sacks is pretty good. And, he had more tackles for loss, I believe, than Hutchinson as well. So, again, when you're looking at this defense, it's still a really good defense, too. It's not just the offense. To me, I think we're setting up, and we're going to talk about the other game with Michigan and Georgia, but I think we're going to set up for this, 3-game set between Georgia and Alabama, and that's going to be so fun to watch. But, look, I first want to talk about this Georgia game here, Georgia-Michigan. Lou, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like Michigan again. I think they're a cool story. This is their first time in the college football playoff since in 8 years, whatever. So they're a fun story, but I don't see Georgia losing this game. I just think they're a completely better team. I think even though they lost to Alabama, they're hungry. They're gonna come out. They're gonna beat Michigan. And I think you're gonna get that what you hinted at, that Georgia-Alabama football championship is kind of what the stars are aligning for. It seems like that's kind of how they set up the seeding, as they're trying to set up that matchup. But I like Michigan. I like Aiden Hutchinson. I love that kid, but he's probably going to be the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he's going to be enough to take. Georgia was the number 1 team in the nation for most of this year.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Hutchinson, too, this year. I mean, obviously Bryce Young deserved the Heisman, but as a number 2 option, Hutchinson was right there, and he wasn't far behind. And I feel like Georgia's too good of a team to beat Michigan. I mean, Michigan had some great wins this year. I mean, Ohio State, 10-2. They lost to Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, they did lose to Michigan State in a close game, only lost by 4. But I just feel like Georgia's too good to beat them, and I think that the stars are aligning, like you said, Lou, that it's just going to end up being another Georgia-Alabama rematch.
Which, I mean, would be, I think, legendary, to be honest.
I mean, nobody's complaining. So
to see if Kirby Smart can really exercise his demons against Nick Saban is going to be, very, very interesting. And I think that when you look at, that matchup between, Georgia and Michigan, I just feel like this Michigan offense is not going to be able to get it done. And I think at the end of the day, that's what's going to come down to. Hutchinson going to probably be the number 1 overall pick. His explosiveness is just crazy. The video that's going around where he just basically bull rushes I believe it was against Ohio State, the left tackle. It was, I mean, like that's something that's like Jadeveon Clowney, what he was doing in college, against Michigan at South Carolina. Obviously didn't pan out, the way maybe Clowney would want to his NFL career, but Hutchinson looks like a special player. I just don't think it's going to be enough to beat a Georgia team that, look, was the number 1 team for a long time. This seems like their apex. It seems Georgia's a team that, not like Alabama, they're good every year. They're like good every 4 years. Like this group's of players is apex. And, look, they should get another shot at Nick Saban, and that would be just a crazy game.
And I frankly would love to see it because, honestly, I think if it came down to Georgia or Bama, I think I would go Georgia. I think they're going to be...
It's hard. It's hard to beat a team in like the matter of, 3 weeks? 4 weeks? It's hard to beat a team twice.
I would love to see a bounce back win. I also think, Georgia's beaten teams a lot more handily than Alabama has. Alabama has a lot closer games. Alabama, I think, has played some tougher opponents down the stretch, but like Georgia took care of Auburn pretty handily. And so I think, you look at that Alabama-Auburn game, and it's a great game. It's exciting, and it provided that Heisman moment for Bryce Young, but I think it also showed that Alabama is a human team. They can be beat. If Auburn can go out there and almost knock off Alabama, I think you have to think that if you're Georgia or even if you're Cincinnati, going back to that matchup, like this is a team that if you play them the right way, if you can find a way to neutralize Bryce Young, you can beat them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so hard to beat a good team twice, especially when you're a good team yourself. We've seen it throughout all sports over the years, and I feel like it's going to be really hard for Alabama to beat a really good Georgia team twice, especially with their balanced attack. I'm looking at the stats right now. They have 2 rushers with over 500 yards and receivers who have between 400 to 700 yards each, and I feel like they have a really good balanced attack that could really attack Alabama's defense.
Yeah, it just seems unlikely. I don't know. Georgia, I mean, look, I think I just don't want to see Alabama win again. I mean, but Nick Saban, I mean, you knew he was angry when I think, I forgot where he said it too, but he said, like, our fans are getting so spoiled that it doesn't even matter if we win. We have to win by, like, double digits or by 20 points for it to, like, be a success for them. He's like, why can't just winning be a success? And, like, after that, he has been just, I mean, like, this team just seems like it's clicked. And, look, if this is what Alabama's rebuilding year looks like, hats off to Nick Saban. That's all I can say.
I mean, that's the scary thing about going and saying that Georgia's going to win is that it's Nick Saban and it's Alabama, and it's right. They've won 3 championships in the past 5 years. Is it? Or it's something crazy like that, and they're always around. Even in the rebuilding year, they're now the number 1 seed. So it's tough to bet against Nick Saban. I want to because like you said, I don't want to see Alabama win. I think it's more fun when other teams get in the mix, but. I think if we get this Bama Georgia chip, I think it's gonna be some really fun competitive football. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's gonna be a great game. I mean, feels like every year Alabama's in it, and it's like the Patriots of the 2000s and 2010s. It's just every year they're in it, and as much as you might not like it, you just gotta accept it. And even a down year for them this year still ends up being the number 1 seed and likely the champion. It's tough to bet against Alabama in this game.
It's better than those Patriots.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like being that dominant is so hard. I mean, hats off to Nick Saban, what he's done with that. I mean, everyone knows it, and it's just like, you'll probably never see that type of dominance again. It's just so crazy. But before we wrap up our college football talk, I want to talk about one more piece. As Oklahoma quarterback, we're talking about the Heisman. Spencer Rattler, he was a Heisman candidate going into the season. That season was just a mess for him this season, and he entered the transfer pool, and he's going to end up at South Carolina, which, look, he gets to play in the SEC. May not be with the best SEC team, but he's going to get a chance to play the best college football talent, and that, look, obviously he's going to be looking towards a draft. We'll see if it helps or hurts his stock.
Yeah, I got a kick out of the whole story where his tight end Austin Stogner was in talks with South Carolina, and Shane Beamer was recruiting. Didn't even think to ask Rattler because he thought he wanted to stay on the West Coast, and Stogner got the two talking, and eventually he comes to South Carolina. And I think it's such a wild story from being that Heisman favorite to getting benched for Caleb Williams, who I thought was awesome.
Yeah.
By the way, I mean, it's tough to argue against that move when the way you saw Caleb Williams play down the stretch sometimes, but. I think it's the right move for Rattler, and I do think it's interesting because South Carolina not necessarily a great team this year. They were 6-6, 3-5 in the conference. So you get Rattler, you get Stogner. I'd like to see, but it's still a competitive division. So I think he's going to play some good teams. I'd like to see how he plays then.
Oh, absolutely. I think it'll be really interesting to see this, especially with him being reunited with his old assistant coach Beamer. Going into the year, I saw that they were projected to only win 4 games, and they exceeded expectations, went 6-6. And Spencer Rattler has a chip on his shoulder. Like, he was the Heisman favorite last year, and like you guys said, he got benched. I think him playing with a chip on his shoulder, being with a coach he's already been with in the past, and a team that is on the rise, I think it could be a good thing for him.
No, for sure. And that's going to be like, look, when you're playing in the SEC, you're going to be able to play that best competition. And I think that's going to be Spencer Rattler's biggest thing. And look, we'll see what he's made of. We'll see what the South Carolina's team is made of. And I don't think their expectations are going to be like, beat Alabama or, go to the SEC championship game. But if this team, could stay in it for most of the season, maybe they end up playing on a New Year's Six bowl, or they end up playing, in a solid bowl game where Rattler could get even more reps. Like, obviously his eyes are going to be on the NFL. I think I forgot who posted. I think it was PFF, but going into the season, they ranked all the QBs coming into the season, and it was like Spencer Rattler and Desmond Ridder, and it blew up. It wasn't obviously nothing near close, but he was the guy going into the season. So now he's going to try to pick up the pieces. Maybe like, a guy like Jalen Hurts was kind of the exact same way. Goes from Alabama, goes to Oklahoma, makes the playoff with Oklahoma, and then obviously is doing good things now with the Eagles. But, I'm assuming that, Rattler's going to try to, use that same path.
Yeah, and looking at South Carolina, it's the team that had to use like 3 different quarterbacks this year. So
yeah, exactly.
Rattler probably not too worried about other QB competition from within, but in the same sense, right? He probably comes in, makes South Carolina better, gives them some stability, and then if South Carolina does well, that only improves his stock. If he's able to turn this team into not even a powerhouse, but just a competitive team that wins more games than at better than a 500 pace. You're talking about that's a pretty good thing on his resume to show NFL teams, say, listen, this is what I can do for a team.
Yeah, I think the comparison between him and Jalen Hurts is a good one. I think the transfer portal, like, Hurts was the Heisman favorite, or if he did win Heisman, I think he did at Alabama. He ended up not playing well in the championship, then was benched for Tua, and then transferred to Oklahoma, had a great year. I think Rattler could have a similar path where if he has a great year here at South Carolina, I think it could really help him with his draft stock and overall, just with being in college football.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to, I think, a positive move for him, and we'll see how it works. Look, we got a full year to kind of let this marinate and kind of see how it works out. But there's going to be a lot of news over the next month in college football. A lot of big games will be played. Bowl season starting, and this is my favorite time of college football. I mean, even the bowl games I like watching. It's always a ton of fun. But that'll wrap up our college football segment for tonight. To finish the show, we'll move over to the NFL, talking about Jets, Giants, then some more positive talk with the playoff picture as well. But first, we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to One-on-One Nightly. Welcome back into One on One Nightly. I'm Andrew Galata alongside Lou Orlando and Matt Benson. Now, guys, let's move over to the NFL. And now I want to start locally. Look, it hasn't been pretty for these two New York teams, so we'll get kind of the negative out of the way first, and then move over to some positive talk with some teams that are going to make the playoffs, which hasn't happened in a long time for either the Jets or Giants, and that will definitely be an interesting conversation. There's so many teams muddled in those areas. It's going to be so fascinating to see how the end of the season takes place. But first, I want to talk about here the Jets and Giants, and we'll start off with the Giants because they're slightly better than the Jets. So, start off maybe on a slightly more positive note. 4-9, last in the NFC East for the Giants, and this season's been a forgettable one. I mean, look, this team came in with pretty big, not huge expectations, but expectations where they can fight for a playoff spot, and they haven't fought for a playoff spot this season, and they will not. And there are a few reasons you can kind of point to. You could point to the injuries. You could point to personnel not playing well. You could point to Joe Judge and his management, especially in-game management of the team. But I mean, Lou, I know you're a big Giants fan, but look, it's been a tough stretch for the Giants.
I was among the Giants fans that foolishly believed we could contend for the NFC East. I was like, yeah, why not? We almost did it last year. But the biggest problem for me, it's not even that we're not going to make the playoffs. It's that this is supposed to be the Daniel Jones prove it year. And I don't think through much fault of his own, we still have no idea where we really stand on him. There's just still so much wrong with the organization, and I think it shows that we fired Jason Garrett halfway through the year. So now it's like, all right, was the problem with Jones sometimes the offense coordinator? Is it still the O-line, which has been atrocious? He doesn't have any time to throw the ball. Injuries galore. You mentioned it to me off air, and it got me thinking. Look at the way that Mike Glennon's kind of played when Daniel Jones has been out, and what does that tell you about what Daniel Jones has been able to do with the team around him, right? So, as a guy that likes Daniel Jones, the biggest thing for me is that I still can't say with certainty, yes, he's the guy. I want to believe it because I do think he's talented, but I mean, there's just so much wrong.
Yeah, the Giants they've been in a tough spot all year with the personnel issues and the coaching issues, and then the injuries all over the offense with Jones being at the forefront of that. I think the Giants are in a tough spot, especially now that we've seen the Mike Glennon era of the Giants. These past couple games have been painful to watch, and I guess for me as an Eagles fan, I don't mind the Giants being bad, but it is tough to watch this football team.
I mean, look, yeah, the Mike Glennon Giants era. I mean, this offense is just it's hard to watch. It really is with Mike Glennon. With Daniel Jones, I mean, look, it wasn't great. It was probably still a bottom 10 team or bottom 10 offense, but at least they moved the ball. They scored some touchdowns. I mean, like this Mike Glennon offense, they don't move the ball a lot. It's stagnant. I mean, it really is. And look, when you have the weapons around him, the offensive line still isn't there. It's just like you expected more, I think, from this much more from this Giants offense to it's so frustrating. It just has to be with this team. Mike Glennon will start again. Joe Judge didn't say that Jake Fromm won't play, so I don't know. Again, he didn't kind of close the door on Jake Fromm playing in the game, which who knows what that means. And that situation, to me, it just shows like the epitome of the Giants over the last few years, how they have to sign a player off the Bills practice squad and then have him in the starting conversation 3 weeks later. I mean, look, that's just been the season for the Giants in a nutshell. And I mean, the one positive thing, the defense, I think, is playing better. I think you have the pieces there going forward where you can build and you're kind of set there. But this offense, I mean, they're kind of cash strapped, which is not a good situation to be in. They have veteran, aging players on the offense, and the offensive line is not good. And you have a quarterback that, as you said, Lou, who knows what Daniel Jones is really made of. I mean, you've seen, the spurts of him. You've seen the flashes of how he could be, a very, very good player. I mean, to me, I think if the system's right, I think he's going to play really well. If the system's not right, he's not going to, magically win you games like some quarterbacks will. I mean, like if you put Patrick Mahomes in this Giants offense, I bet they win some, games and they're at least 500. Daniel Jones is not going to be that player. He's not going to be the Russell Wilson. But I think he could be an average QB, and then with a good team around him, with a good offensive line, which he just hasn't had, I mean, he could definitely win games. I think the question is going to be, can he win meaningful games and big games? And we have no clue if that's, going to be the case. We may never know if that's going to be the case with the Giants. Maybe we'll see, later in his career. But, it's been such a mess with this Giants offense. And, right now a lot of people they fired Jason Garrett, and now people are, who's the next guy? It's Joe Judge, and I think that's kind of the main thing. What are the Giants are going to do with Joe Judge? Because they're not going to retain Dave Gettleman, whether it's through retiring or firing, but Judge is kind of still up in the air. I think that's the biggest question right now with the Giants is Judge the guy? And then, if you're going to stick with him, great. Then, you got to do some things, I think, to revamp this team. If you're not and you're just going to blow it all up, I think that changes a lot for this Giants team.
Yeah, at this point, I'd probably lean towards more Judge isn't the guy as to he is the guy, but I'd still be willing to give him another year, just kind of like, how does this team do without Jason Garrett? I feel like was a big part of their issues was the offensive play calling, so I'm not opposed to giving Joe Judge another year. If they decided to fire him at the end of the season, I also wouldn't be upset. But it's because the Giants are in such a weird spot where it's like, yeah, they're a rebuilding team, but they have so many like veteran pieces, like you said. So it's like, it's almost kind of like you need to move quickly if you want to take advantage of the talent that you do have, because the defense is good.
Yeah,
the defense has been playing well pretty much since I want to say
that
like
Rams
week 4.
game.
Yeah,
it was I think week 5. So you're right there.
So yeah, right. Since week 5, I think this defense has shown a lot of great stuff. I think back to when they beat your Eagles, like they held Jalen Hurts to 7 points, and Jalen Hurts was coming off.
Xavier McKinney was awesome in that game.
Yeah, and Xavier McKinney I think is a potential Pro Bowl candidate right now. So there's so much talent in the defense, but it's not like McKinney's young, but they're like Leonard Williams is basically in his prime, Bradbury's basically in his prime, Blake Martinez basically in his prime. And on the offensive side, there's some young talent, but like Galladay is supposed to be in his prime. So it's like on paper, I think on both sides you have talent, but then there's just the gap at O-line is huge. I don't know how you even solve that. Like you have to just go out and get, I guess, 4 new linemen really, besides if you believe in Andrew Thomas, which I do. It's because they're not like a young rebuilding team is really the big issue. So this window that they have, it's small. I don't have any confidence that they're going to be able to take advantage of it.
I mean, I don't know as much as you do, looking from the outside going in, but I guess for me personally, I feel like the Giants should give Judge one more year, especially with the situation around him, like with Garrett, he's gone now. Gettleman, he's likely gone. With those two guys on the way out, I think we should give him one more year to see what he's like in a more stable situation with a better offensive coordinator.
Joe Judge, I mean, it's really like, look, he had one down year because last year everyone was singing his praises, which I think is like being an NFL coach must be so hard. I mean, literally 6 months ago, people were saying how this guy's going to be, like this great descendant of Bill Belichick and is going to bring the Giants back to the promised land. You look now in December, people are calling for his head basically daily. I mean, look, his tactics are definitely unusual. I think you could say that the way he, basically just operates within his program. It's just, look, the laughs, the whole thing. It's just, you haven't really seen it really on a professional level. And that's what I think with people, when you don't see the results, they're like, oh, is this going to work? And look, this Giants team, I just think they were built the wrong way. And like you said, this offensive line, you have all the pieces around them. They're like, okay, we're ready to compete. And they just like forgot, oh, we have to play offensive line too. Like, because it's hard to build an offensive line in 1 year. Like, they're not going to do it. And then let's say they build the right offensive line in 3 years, then Galladay's older, which is, look, then he's gone. Kadarius Toney, you're going to have to pay him if he's good. If he's not good, he's gone. Sterling Shepard, he's probably going to be gone. And Saquon Barkley, who knows what's going to be up with his situation. Then you go to the defense, who knows what the defensive situation will be in 3 years. It's just the Giants are in such a precarious situation where they built their teams by skill position players. And it's you don't build your teams like that in the NFL. You look at the teams that are most successful, they're good on offensive line, they're good at defensive line, and then you could kind of work around the other things. And when you're, at that level to add skill position players, they do. The Giants, they have all these great skill position players, but they can't, block the quarterback. And it's so frustrating that they can't get the ball to a guy like Kadarius Toney, who's been, a roller coaster season due to injuries, now COVID. It's going to be just, he's been a roller coaster up and down, but you see the flashes. I mean, he's a really, really good talent. Kenny Galladay, if we've seen his talent with the Lions, it's just like, it's just puzzling where this team goes from here. With those 2 draft picks they're going to have, I would pick
hopefully 2 top 10 picks.
Yeah, it seems like 2 top 10 picks. That better be 2 offensive linemen. I mean, I know this team has other worries, but if you drafted 2 guys that you have Thomas and then now 2 top 10 picks, I think now you're in a situation where, okay, maybe the offensive line is going to be a lot better.
The only thing I would even be able to be like, all right, is if they drafted like a big D end run, like
Okay.
a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
pass rusher. Because I think is the other issue that the Giants have had.
Is that.
I do like Ojulari, but I mean their defense has been one of their best straight. So if they went out and they drafted 2 linemen, I'd be ecstatic. If they were able to get a top pass rusher, I'd be okay with that too. But like those are the heading into this draft, and I'm kind of getting to that point where it's like I'm okay with losing games if it means better draft picks, because especially if Daniel Jones isn't playing. If Daniel Jones is playing, sure, let's win some games. Let's see him play well. But if it's Mike Glennon, like, all right, let's lose some games here. Let's get some good draft picks.
Yeah, and I think using the picks on offensive line would be really important. I mean, I feel like every good team in the NFL is built with the offensive line. If you have a good offensive line, then typically, even if you don't have good skill position players or a good quarterback, you can find your way to win some games. I mean, we could see it with the Colts right now. They have a great offensive line, and I don't think Carson Wentz is a great quarterback, but guess what? The Colts are right in the middle of the playoff race, and they're a pretty solid team. I think if the Giants get good offensive line, I mean, I think that's also a big reason why Daniel Jones has had some of the struggles that he's had. It's just because of the offensive line. He has the pieces around him with Galladay and Tony. He just doesn't have the time to actually get the ball to them, so...
Yeah, and it's easier said than done. It's not you just draft offensive linemen and okay, yep, we're good. I mean, look what the Giants have done. I mean, Eric Flowers was just a big bust for them. It's not like they haven't drafted on linemen. I mean, even Will Hernandez, who's a guy's second-round pick, I think he was the first pick of the second round, hasn't worked out to the way, I think Giants fans wanted that to work out too. It's not easy to hit on the offensive line, but, the teams that do, and you talked about the Colts. I mean, talk about even a team like the Saints who have a pretty solid offensive line, good defensive line. I mean, the team is nothing on the skill position players, starting Taysom Hill at quarterback, and they're still a 6-7 ball club. Like, to me, if you're good in those two areas, you will be an average team. Whether you can have the worst skill position players in the league, but you'll probably be average. But when you're built the other way, that's when dysfunction happens. We've seen it with both these teams. We'll talk about the Jets as well. Like, when you're not good up front and you're not good in the trenches, it's a recipe for disaster, to try to build sustainable success.
Yeah, and so much has been made about Daniel Jones' struggles, about Barkley not being able to recover from his injury. I think those are they're directly related to the O-line. That Daniel Jones is one of the top 5 pressured quarterbacks in the league, and he's kind of gotten better at playing with the pressure.
And he's probably been that way since he was a rookie, too.
Oh, absolutely, because this O-line has been basically the same since he's kind of came into the league. So he's always had to deal with pressure. He's getting better at dealing with it, but you'd love to put him into a spot where it's not that big of an issue. Saquon Barkley is not the type of runner where if he gets the ball and there are 3 defenders already at him 5 yards back from the line of scrimmage, it's not going to work out that well. So there are problems here, and I think they directly correlate to that O-line.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's really hard to judge whether Daniel Jones is a good quarterback or not just because of the issues around him in terms of the offensive line. And even Saquon, like, is he still fighting an injury? Is he getting re-injured just because the offensive line is so bad that he's getting hit as soon as he touches the ball? Like, who really knows? And
Feels
I think,
like it.
yeah.
I mean, it's just, look, I mean, that's been the Giants' season, and they tried. I think Dave Gettleman miscalculated that this team was ready to win now. And the way he built this team in this offseason where he got all these skill position players when they really needed to focus on the offensive line. Look, Ojulari's had a great season. I mean, think if Ojulari hasn't had 7.5 sacks, where the defensive line would be. He's played great. I mean, Leonard Williams seems like he's going to be, got hurt in last week's game, but he's been solid this year. I mean, look, I think when looking at it, this team is going to just have to beef up on those lines, and I think that's going to be the most interesting thing, but we'll see what happens. I think, look, having those 2 picks is going to help, and then who knows, maybe Russell Wilson could be into the fold next year too. It seems like one of his trade destinations could be New York, but I mean, that'll be a conversation for another day, maybe in the off season. But I want to move over to the Jets, and it hasn't been pretty for them as well either. I think probably somehow worse than the Giants, but it has been. I mean, for them, 3-10, 4th in the AFC East, lost to the Saints, 30-9. Miami will be next for them on the docket, and for them, without Moore, Corey Davis, I mean, this offense is just anemic. I mean, there's really no other way to say it right now with the way this offense is played. Zach Wilson has not played well all season. I mean, you could see maybe point to a few moments, but for the most part, it's been up and down and mostly down for him. Looking at this defense, it's just, I mean, look, they got nobody right now. I mean, the way this team's playing, it's just such, a tough topic to talk about the Jets because I don't even know, how you're going to build this team. Like you're really at, the foundational level of rebuilding, and we'll see now how they move from here.
Yeah, you're really looking at like how you're just trying to watch them play somewhat competitive football, and that's what sucks about this Saints loss is that it ruined a streak of it was like a 3-week stretch of what I kind of thought was semi-competitive football.
Yeah.
The 24-17 loss to the Dolphins wasn't good, but like the defense held up a little bit, and it was Joe Flacco who wasn't doing anything. So you're like, if the offense was better, maybe we're in that game. And then they beat Houston. Zach Wilson has like a bounce back second half, and you're like, all right, like that's something. And then even the 33-18 loss to the Eagles, like that first half was great. I think they were down 24-18. And then second half complete collapse. So it's like each game you saw like a half of like, all right, solid football, like let's do that more often. And then this Saints game was just, even as a Saints fan, I know you were probably ecstatic about it. It was awful.
I mean, it was hard to watch though. I will say, like, I mean, it's not like the Saints play this great brand of football. I mean, either the Saints are running it with Taysom Hill, they're running it with Alvin Kamara. But the biggest stat out of that game was Alvin Kamara had more yards after contact than the Jets had rushing yards. Period. So that's not going to win you a lot of games if you do that.
Yeah. I mean, as shown by the last 2 games, the Jets' defense is really, really struggling. Just letting up back-to-back games of 30 points.
Against 2 backups.
Yeah, 2 backups. I mean, Gardner Minshew just lit up the Jets, especially in the first half. I know he threw 2 touchdowns. And then the Saints with Taysom Hill as quarterback. I mean, he basically had the same week that Minshew had. He just destroyed the Jets' defense. And then moving on to the quarterback, I mean, Zach Wilson has not looked like a number 2 overall pick so far. I mean, I know he was hurt for a few weeks, and obviously he had to get some time to get back, but I think this was his 3rd week back now, and it really hasn't gone up for him at all. So,
look, there's just not many there's just really not a lot of positives for this Jets team, and injuries have also, I think, been a part of that too. It seems like every time the Jets have like a bright light that maybe you see it, then the guy gets hurt. Talk about Mekhi Becton, or with Elijah Moore, who I think is going to be a really solid player in the future. So they are building, but it just seems like every time they have one of these prospects, I guess you want to call them, and they're kind of blooming, then you see them a season-ending injury, which is just tough. And now they're at a situation where there wasn't a lot of depth to start, and now you're in the situation where you're playing a lot of bottom of the barrel type players in the NFL. But I don't want to hang on the Jets too long. I don't want to be a negative Nancy for so long about this Jets season. I do want to move over to the playoff picture, and I want to start off in the AFC here, and a lot of 7-6 teams right now. It seems like you have kind of 5 solid teams. You have the Patriots at number 1, Tennessee at number 2, Chiefs at 3, Ravens coming in the 4th seed, and then the first wild card is the Chargers, and then after that, it's just 7-6 teams. I think there's 4 of them.
Might be 5.
Yeah, 5 of them. I'm sorry. And then the Pittsburgh's right there at 6-1. Miami's hanging around at 6-7. So are the Raiders. I mean, who knows who's going to win this? This could be a grab bag. I mean, Matt. I mean, this team right now. I mean, this conference right now. I mean, look. I mean, you see the Bills who have kind of underperformed this year. The Browns who underperformed. Then you have some overperformers like the Bengals and the Broncos a bit. It's just. I mean, it's anyone's. For these last few spots, it could be anybody.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm loving it. As it's going on, it's super entertaining. I would rather have a competitive race like this with 5 mediocre teams than there just be 7 teams that are so much better than everybody else. I'm really excited for how this is going to pan out. I'm looking at the Colts right now in the 6th spot, and I'm looking at the remaining schedule, and I'm not liking them right now. I see they're playing the Patriots, the Cardinals, and the Raiders. Like, there's a decent chance they could go 1-3 for the remaining of the season. They could be very quickly out of the picture. The Bills, like you said, have underperformed. Josh Allen he's not having the same year as he had last year, and then same with the Browns. They're right there, but I like the Bengals, to be honest. I really like Joe Burrow this year. I think their offense has been really good. And I think the Bengals, even though they're in the 9th spot right now, I mean, they're tied with everybody else, so technically not the 9th spot. But I think they could jump up very quickly.
The Bengals are the one team right in the hunt right now that I legitimately see maybe being able to jump Indianapolis. I don't see Buffalo falling out because their last 4 games, outside of a Patriots rematch, which could be interesting in its own right if both teams are able to throw the ball, how that pans out. But it's Carolina, Atlanta, then the Jets. Buffalo should be able, even when they're not playing their best football, they should be able to come away with 3 wins there. So I think they hang in the picture. And you mentioned the Colts schedule. That's pretty tough. Cincinnati's got a tough schedule. They got to play the Chiefs, got to play the Browns, got to play the Ravens. But I think if they can get a couple wins there, not only is that get them into the playoffs, I think it gives them confidence to the playoffs. Like, hey, we can square up against some of these good teams. Maybe it gives them a little momentum.
I love the Bengals. I mean, I love Joe Burrow. I mean, obviously going to LSU. I mean, as following the Saints, you kind of on your Twitter feed, all the LSU stuff comes up as well. So I was able to follow him. I mean, Jamar Chase. I mean, he was insane in college. He's insane in the pros. And for them to be together, it's almost like fate. I mean, even the other guys, T. Higgins and what they're doing. I mean, like that is a tough group to stop. And when looking at this Bengals team, you like to see the refreshness of that franchise really, and it's great to see that they're working their way back, and they have a lot of former Saints players too. But it just feels like this Bengals team. It seems like they got a tough schedule, but I feel like everyone kind of does because everyone more or less plays each other too.
Yeah.
Because and all these teams are solid. I mean, when you're a 13 seed, I mean, right now, I mean, is the Dolphins, and like, there's only 16, teams in a conference. So the 13 seeds the Dolphins, and they're 6-7. Like that is, really a good conference, a really strong conference. And look, I mean, when you're looking at these teams, I believe the Bills. I agree with you guys. I think they're going to get in. And when you're looking at the other teams, I think, again, it's really anybody's game. Like I could see any of these teams. I could even see a team like the Broncos just kind of sneaking in at 7-8. The Dolphins have a very favorable schedule when you're looking at, they don't have to play the Bills anymore. They have the Saints. They have the Jets this week. So when you're looking at, what they're doing, it's possible that maybe if they can go 9-8, 10-7, they could run the table. I think a lot of teams are still alive here, which is going to make for a really fun December.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going to your point about the Dolphins, like they are technically the 13 seed right now at 6-7, but they've won 5 straight games. Like they are rolling right now. And then they play the Jets. I think no, they don't play them twice.
They play them once.
They play them next week, and I think if they end up going 4-0, get themselves to 10-7, they could sneak into that 7 spot.
That would be a dangerous team if they won 9 straight.
Yeah,
if they're starting 1-7.
Nobody's gonna want to play them if they won 9 straight.
I mean, Tua has been playing a lot better.
Absolutely.
And, it's just the way because they played the Giants a few weeks back, and I was watching that game, and it seems like he reminds me of like an older Drew Brees, and like he makes every throw. Like the guy's like an 85% completion percentage, but they're not like these deep balls, and they're not these nice passes. But he's able to get 10-yard passes down the field to a guy like Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki. I mean, like this team, they're not pretty, and like the way they play defense, it's that back end playing so well with it. Xavier Howard, and he's just been outstanding yet again for them. Byron Jones. I mean, look, they're a dangerous team here. I mean, the Browns, I think, they're another team where obviously they're going to have to play these AFC North teams, so they're going to probably have a tough schedule down the stretch. But when you're looking at it, they got the talent, and we'll see their COVID situation. I think that's going to be really interesting.
I think they have like 18 guys
so
on the COVID list.
That
right
obviously
now.
is going to change this a lot. I think that's another thing to bring up, how just COVID, it may be the team, because these teams I think are so close in talent too. It may be the team that doesn't get ravaged by COVID where, I mean, I believe Baker Mayfield's on the COVID list. So if he misses a game, that would then change a lot of things. So I think, again, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this pans out. We'll see how the COVID situation works out, as that's running rampant in the NFL right now. And then you have a team like the Broncos sitting there at 7-6. Like they're like, if you feel like, oh, they're not really that good, but they're 7-6. They've played pretty well. Teddy Bridgewater's held down the ship there. I don't know. I really could see a lot of these teams.
That's the cool thing about the AFC is I think every single team that's not mathematically eliminated is a legitimately talented team that has a shot to make the play. Like the team I'm lowest on out of the 6 or 7 in the hunt is the Steelers. I have no confidence in the Steelers. Don't believe in Big Ben. Just don't think that anything's going to happen with them. But I think every single other team, you can make a case. Like the Raiders have shown flashes where Derek Carr is arguably a top 10 quarterback in the league this year at times, statistically. He's having a really good year. Dolphins have won 5 straight games. Those are the 2 lowest teams in the hunt. And those are 2 legitimate teams that if they win the right games could find themselves, it's a long shot, but could find themselves in the playoffs. So I think that's the beautiful thing about the AFC is that I don't think anyone really knows how this is all going to fall out.
Yeah, and I think that's also not just the beautiful thing about the AFC, it's the beautiful thing about football. Like, the fact that 13 teams are in it, like, it's great to watch, and there are some great teams that are even at 7-6 right now. I mean, we already talked about the Bengals. We've already talked about the Dolphins, the Raiders. Like you said, Derek Carr's had a fantastic year, and it's great to see because I've always been high on Derek Carr, and then he had that big, I think he tore his ACL or something like that in like 2016, and he's finally making his way back. And I think if the Raiders make a push, they could do it. I've liked them a lot, and like you said with the Steelers, I just don't think they're that good of a team realistically. Even though they are at 500, I just don't think they're good enough.
Yeah, you should look at like the one thing I will say about the AFC, which has been funny this year, and you maybe even say it at the NFL as a whole, is that whatever you think is gonna happen, it just seems like it takes a 180 and the exact opposite happens. Like even the favorites. I mean, look how the Chiefs started. You wouldn't have expected that. Even like last week, I was like, me and my buddy were talking about the Ravens and Browns game going into it. I was like, I bet the Browns win this game just because, yeah, the Ravens are supposed to win the game, and you just like that's been that type of season where no one's been really consistent outside of seems like the Chiefs now. And like all these teams, like the Bengals were at one point, I think they were the 1 seed. I remember, like 5 weeks ago, not too long ago. The Chargers were always, just all these teams very inconsistent, which is why you have 13 teams in the mix. But there's also no clear favorite.
And like even at the top, right? Like the Patriots are the best team in the AFC right now, which is who saw that coming? They kind of came out of nowhere. The Titans somehow who have been missing Derrick Henry, who feels like forever, are the 2 seed. And like I haven't really been keeping tabs of the Titans. I feel like they kind of just went under the radar as soon as Derrick Henry got hurt, but they're treading water, and right now they're a 2 seed. Like so, I think up and down, you look at the AFC standings, and if you showed it to someone before the season, they'd be like, "This doesn't make any sense at all."
Yeah, and like you said with the Patriots, I mean, Mac Jones in his rookie year, and he's playing this well already.
He's arguably the only good quarterback from that class right now.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen the struggles with Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence, and he's flourished in Bill Belichick's offense. And then the Titans, Derrick Henry's going to be returning for the playoffs, and possibly Week 18 if they need it. They could be a really dangerous team, I think, to make a deep run, especially with how well they're playing without him. I think Patriots, Titans right now are the top 2. I mean, Mahomes he's been playing a lot better. He's been playing a lot better lately.
They did just put up 40-something on the Raiders.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. I mean, Mahomes is like that. Like,
it's crazy.
In a year of uncertainty, I feel like the only certainty is Patrick Mahomes. He's just so crazy, and it's definitely going to be a very interesting stretch here, a stretch run at the end of December and going into January. Maybe it's good that this now 18 weeks get another extra week to really see who that 6 and 7 seed will be. But I also want to move over to the NFC, where it's just really similar. You have a lot of 7 and 6, 6 and 7, really 6 and 7. It's really where everyone's knotted up, but 49ers are in there at 7 and 6 as well. Like you have your 5, solid teams. You have the Packers, Buccaneers, Cards, Cowboys, Rams. And then after that, it's just like it's a sea of mediocrity right now, because that's really what it is. You have all these teams that are really incomplete teams, but they're somehow in the mix for a 6th or 7th playoff spot. I mean, you have the 49ers, you have Washington. They're the 2 teams in it right now, but that's really just because of tiebreakers, because you have the Vikings in the mix, Eagles in the mix, Falcons in the mix, Saints in the mix. And right now, it's really, to me, it's the race to 3-1. Who can down the stretch go 3-1? We'll see. I mean, maybe a team will have to go undefeated, but I think right now in looking at these teams, and also what's funny is that all these teams are division teams. They all play each other. Like Washington, the Eagles will play each other twice. The Saints play the Falcons. I mean, you have all these teams within each other's division, which I think makes this dynamic even more interesting.
Yeah, the NFC is funny because it's kind of like not the polar opposite of the AFC, but it's really like those last couple of wildcard spots. It's kind of like, all right, who's going to be the team that steps up and kind of wants to take it? Because you just have so many like random teams that if you looked at it, you'd be like, how are they still in how are the Falcons still in playoff contention? How are the Washington football team honestly still? They're like currently the 7th seed. Like I thought Washington was horrible for most of this year, and you look up and boom, they're the 7th seed right now. I don't believe in Washington. I think they're going to fall out, but. You look at some of the other teams and you go, well, maybe they'll stay there just because some of the other teams aren't that good either. I think San Francisco has a chance to kind of create some separation. They get to play the Texans and the Falcons. I think that gives them. I like the way San Francisco's been playing recently. I think they won some. Their win over the Vikings was pretty convincing. The Vikings were the team for me. I think I said it a few weeks ago on one show that I really liked the Vikings. I thought they were an X factor because of the way they play against great competition, but they've lost to the Lions. So it's like who. What do we really know?
Yeah. I feel like the NFC, even though the records are pretty much identical to the AFC, I feel like the NFC is just it's almost light years behind the AFC in terms of how good the teams are. Like I feel like Washington being at 7 is just I don't know how they got to 7, but they're there, and the fact that the Vikings just keep losing close games, just as we saw with the Lions a couple weeks ago. I feel like the Vikings should be such a better team, but hey, they're on the bubble right now, and they're not in the playoffs. And then even on the polar opposite side, who would have thought the Falcons would have been here? Like, they're 6 and 7, same with the Saints too. Like I didn't have I don't know about you, but I didn't have super high expectations for the Saints this year, and they're right in it too. And who would have thought first year without Drew Brees, they're right in the playoff mix again. So
and without Jameis Winston, like
yeah,
that's
Winston.
why I think like the Saints team. Look, they shouldn't have a shot. Like the Saints, they're not a playoff. The way they're constructed right now, their number one receiver is Traquan Smith, and their number two receiver is Marquez Callaway. Which look, and then number three is Kevin White, if you remember him from that the draft pick back. I think he went to West Virginia in like 2015, and then he just fell off the face of the earth after getting picked in the top 10. And he's now their number three receiver. Look, this Saints team the offense is just, it's not good. You have Kamara back, and that's kind of your saving grace. And you saw what he did against the Jets, where he was just outstanding. But then again, it's the Jets. So again, when you're looking at the Saints, I think they could go 3-1, and that's just based off of their schedule, being light. You play the Bucs this week, which you're probably thinking you're going to lose that game. And after that, you play Miami at home, where you're hoping you can get the win at home against Miami. Then you play the Panthers and then the Falcons. You're hoping to get a few wins there. If they're a playoff team, you win 3 of those games. We'll see. I think the Eagles, they're going to be playing Washington twice. I think they're actually a better team than Washington. So if they can win those games, you're going to set yourself up in a good position. The Vikings, I think, are the best team, but they have a hard schedule. And but look, they play good against good teams. Who knows? But I don't think they're going to end up making the playoffs. It's going to be an interesting battle. I really want the Saints, obviously, to make the playoffs. I think they have a lane just because of their schedule. I think is the lightest out of all these teams, but I don't think they're the best team, so we'll kind of have to see.
The question I kind of keep asking myself, especially regarding the 7 seed, is like, which team, if they got in, actually has a shot to win a playoff game? And I think it's the Vikings.
It is,
I think
agree.
there's maybe not to the same extent. I could see the Eagles coming out if Jalen Hurts plays really well, because I think Jalen Hurts at times has legitimately been like a top 10 quarterback this year. Like he's shown flashes of just being absolutely awesome. But the Vikings especially, I think, have just played so competitively against the best teams.
Well, they're a talented team.
Right. I think if you threw them into the playoffs, I think they could really mess stuff up for some really good teams, just because of the way they always play up to the competition. In the same sense, they always play down to their competition. But if you threw them into the playoffs, they really wouldn't have to worry about like playing against the Lions or anything like that. They just have to play the best of the best, and I think they'd play up to that level.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it seems like you mentioned with them playing the Lions. Sorry, it feels like they play down to bad teams and they play up to the level of the good teams. So I'm less worried about the Vikings having a tougher schedule towards the end of the year. I think they're gonna at least go 2-2. They could go 3-1, but I just keep looking at the Eagles and Washington, and the fan in me wants the Eagles to win twice against Washington. I just don't see how they're going to end up winning 3 games of 4 division games in a row. I think they can beat Washington definitely once. They can beat New York. I just don't see how they could beat Washington twice down the end of the year. And then Washington's going to end up losing, in my opinion, one to the Eagles, and then they'll probably end up losing one more. So the Vikings will
probably. And I think the Giants, if Daniel Jones comes back, I don't think the Giants are pushovers, to be honest. I think this team could beat an NFC East opponent. They already beat the Eagles once. I could see them beating Washington. This team, I think, is talented. That's the thing about the Giants. They started 0-3, but really after that they've been in games. It's not like they've been always blown out with Daniel Jones. With Mike Glenn, it's a different story. But if Daniel Jones comes back, I think this team isn't like a complete pushover like maybe the Bears are or the Lions are if you're not the Vikings. But I think when you look at teams that that could win a game in the playoffs, I will say that Saints defense is going to be tough. That defense is very, very good. Marshawn Lattimore, you could go through the guys. Demario Davis. What this team does, they're going to pressure you. They're going to, hopefully create turnovers for that offense. And they're a bad matchup for, I think, a few of these teams, and they can match up against, a Bucs really well. And, look, I'm not going to say the Saints are going to beat the Bucs. I just don't think they're at that level right now. They were, I think, with Jameis Winston and with, not a ton of injuries. Maybe with Michael Thomas, so you're talking about a different team right now. But I think this defense matches up well against a team like the Bucs because they can match up against all the receivers really, really well. You can match up against the Cowboys really well. Will they get it done? Probably not if they got into the playoffs, but having a good defense will help so much in the playoffs. Yeah,
that would be big just because I think their offense is not going to allow them to hang with the the shooters of the Bucks, the big team Cowboys, but I think their defense, especially in playoffs, if you can find a way to neutralize those big teams, it can keep you in those games, and that's kind of when funny stuff happens.
Yeah, it's some defense wins championships. I mean, I don't think the Saints are going to win a championship this year, but
No.
if they're gonna get into the playoffs, it's going to be the defense that really helps them out. And I don't think they're going to make any sort of deep run or even win a game. But I think if their defense could stop one of the better teams and just give them a game, make them, make their heart beat a little bit, I think it could be a really entertaining matchup.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Taysom Hill made a run, I don't know. That would be
What a story.
That would be the last thing in the world that you would say if Taysom Hill, makes a run. If it only it's like Tim Tebow winning that game, against the Steelers, like it would be that level. I feel, because I mean, right now, I mean, this Saints team, I feel like all they do is, I mean, now they're gonna run it to Kamara, but then they just do QB power with Taysom Hill because he's also hurt. But he's playing through an injury. It's just like, but I do think for all these teams, and when you're 6-7, a lot of teams are like, oh, should we tank? Should we not tank? I think the biggest thing is like, no, you shouldn't tank. You should go for it because, it's teams like, the 9-7 Giants. That's the reason you don't tank because you never know. Once you get in, who knows who's going to make the run? Last year, the Bucks, obviously a much better team, but they made the run from the wild card team in. And like that's the reason, like you don't want to tank. Obviously a draft pick is desirable, but look, if you get in the dance, anything could happen.
If this NFL regular season has taught me anything, it's listen. Like the Jaguars have beaten the Bills. I think every single team here should feel like let's just play for the playoffs and see what happens because we've just seen so much crazy stuff where it's like, well, I didn't think that was going to happen. How did that team beat this team? So I think. For a lot of these teams, just get into the playoffs and then just give yourself a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's so many bracket busters just in the mix here, and then on top of just trying to, make a splash in the playoffs, I think teams like Washington or Philly, like it could be really valuable with their young core to just get playoff experience for the future. Like we see Heineke, we see Hurts. Like if those are the guys for the future for those teams, it could be really valuable for them in the future, I think.
Nah, for sure. It's going to be such a fun last 4 games of the NFL season. I just cannot wait to see how it unfolds. But I think with all that said, it is time to wrap up the show. Thank you to all our viewers for sticking with us. We covered so much sports today. These shows are always too quick, at least for me. But for our producers behind the glass, Will Talent, Alex Wool's always doing a great job of keeping the lights on. Patrick Amatoro helping us with the graphics. And for my partners, Matt Benson and Lou Orlando, I'm Andrew Galata saying get some sleep and have a great rest of your night. One-on-One Nightly is a production of WFUV Sports.